Hey guys, this is Hell Hades. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video. Guys, we want to talk about epic empowerment that is coming to Raid Shadow Legends according to the roadmap, I guess relatively soon, certainly within 6 months, but maybe a lot sooner than that because it was the number 2 thing on the roadmap. Firstly, what I want to do is talk about what does it actually mean and what sort of things might we see when this starts to pop up. The second thing I want to do is just kind of like break down some of the best picks I think for epics that you might actually empower. But let's start in the first point. So I guess there's a few things to call out. It's much easier to max out, epics in stuff like the faction guardians. Yeah, so it's much easier just to max out your epics and get full stats here. It's much easier to find souls for epics than it is legendaries. If I look at my kind of like epics that are 6-starred, I've got way more 6 and 5 stars in epics than I have in legendaries, right? Because you just get a higher rate, just get a higher pull rate of potentially picking up your 5 and 6 star epics, right? So clearly you're going to have more. And we start to get this interesting dynamic then to say, what if you've got 5 or 6 star epics that you've plus forward? Do they start to compete with legendaries that perhaps you haven't got anything better than like a 1-star blessing and you haven't got them empowered and maybe you haven't filled out their faction guardians? And I think the answer could be yes. In fact, myself and Saf were talking about this earlier. Is it possible when the time comes that we could build some sort of tool that helps people make those type of decisions? But I think it definitely is possible. So which areas of the game would you be thinking about empowerment for if you're using epics in particular? Well, certainly there's a lot of areas of the Cursed City where you have to bring epics, and just having those stats of additional. Well, in fact, let's go through the stats before we talk about that. If you're empowering someone, let's see if I got someone here that I could actually take all the way. Okay, so yeah, if I was to throw my Whirlim in here and power him up, and I'd imagine epic empowerment's going to work pretty similar to this. Might not be exactly the same, but it's going to be pretty similar. So you're probably going to have, a boost of base stats. So health, defense, and attack. It might be more like 30% instead of 40. I'm guessing, I don't know. Or it might still be 40. Might be exactly the same. I'd imagine speed might be like plus 10 instead of plus 15. I'd imagine accuracy and resistance might be plus 40 instead of 55. Crit rate, crit damage, maybe like 5 and 20 or 5 and 25. So you're going to get a good boost of stats. It's a lot. It's a lot. And, and the reason why I come to that conclusion is because really of how they deal with, the blessing stuff. So if you've got a legendary and you're getting all of these stats, like, 7.5k health, 750 attack, 600 defense, if you compare that to an epic, and it's a similar style of thing really, right? So compare it to an epic, epics are getting, around 80 odd percent, 85% of what the legendaries are getting. So I'd imagine they're going to run it through similar in empowerment. That's a lot of additional stats. If you've got an epic that's 4, 5, 6 star empowered, and then you also ascend them to plus 3, plus 4, then I think there's some pretty decent examples of where those epics start to outpower legendaries that don't have those type of upgrades. So I definitely think it's going to be a thing. I think, being able to compare between two is going to actually be really useful. So yeah, areas where I think it's going to be useful. Cursed City for sure. This is hard content, especially when you start to get into this area at the top here. Soul Cross, particularly difficult. Killing Amius on hard, it's particularly difficult. So, more stats for survivability is going to be really important. More stats for damage is going to be important. I think Hydra is going to be huge. So, having champions like your Royal Guards or your Husks coming in plus forward, especially if you've got, decent blessings on them, then suddenly they might come in as the damage dealers for, your Nightmare or your Brutal runs. Champions that are quite squishy but do a lot of damage suddenly wouldn't be anywhere near as squishy, and obviously you get your damage out. So I think we're going to see some epics start to really ramp up in content. Normal clan boss, potentially, but most people that are getting to the point where they're plus 4 in an epic have probably got clan boss on lockdown, I would suggest, but maybe not. And then the other big area, I think, is arena. Certainly live arena, but mainly, honestly, classic arena for the more average player, you start to have to make decisions around which nuker is your best nuker. If you've got, a +4, let's say Dembo, is that actually going to be your best nuker now compared to, just a straight out of the tin, I don't know, like Cupidus or someone. So those type of decisions actually become quite challenging. I guess the only other area where I think it might start to play a factor is somewhere like Iron Twins, anyone that you use for soloing content. So solo or duo champs like, your Godseeker, maybe someone like a Venomage starts popping back up for soloing, hard dungeons. And I guess somewhere like Phantom's Grove where you need quite a high stat requirement to deal with stuff. But yeah, I think old school dungeons generally won't be a thing. It will be more like the hard dungeons where you need to start thinking about +4 in. So let's go through some of the champions that I think are going to be hot on the list of people that... It's funny because I think, is it just the same list of champions in terms of like best epics in the game? I think it's kind of close, honestly. I think it's going to be pretty damn close. If they were already a good epic, then yeah, of course, they're going to benefit from +4ing. But I think some benefit a lot more than others. Especially, you've got two lines of thought. You've almost got damage dealers are going to benefit from that extra crit rate and crit damage. And potentially squishy damage dealers benefit from a bit of survivability. And then you've got champions which are solo champions, which just benefit from, stat boost. Originally, I was going to do like a top 20, but I think it's going to be more like 30, honestly. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to break it down into different areas of the game where I feel like these champions might pop up and start messing with the meta, or at least start to improve their chances of getting into teams. So let's go with some dungeon teams then. Firstly, I did a video recently on Tolf soloing the Phantom Grove. Couldn't do 25. Maybe with this empowerment, he can do 25. In fact, I think there's a good chance that he does. So Tolf suddenly first on my list. Not the best, but first. Let's talk about a couple of champions that are more likely to be used generally. So Godseeker, for all of the stuff that she's in, where she's kind of like soloing or duoing, basically duos, her stat requirement's quite high to do that. So, being able to even like +2 someone like a Godseeker makes those build requirements tons easier to do. So, those extra like 20% HP in defense, if you then get like +4, 40-odd%, plus some speed, damn, makes that type of build a lot easier to get done. What about champions like Ornn or Eurogrim, who used to be able to solo stuff, potentially with all of those extra stats, the speed, more accuracy, all that type of stuff, maybe they can again. So, Eurogrim might start to pop up in something like a hard dragon, for example. Who else have we got on the list here? In terms of dungeons, really good hard Fire Knight epic, Neldor. I don't know if empowerment really changes the scene for him, other than makes his build easier to achieve. And it's the same type of thing with a Creodan, honestly. Like, they're not damage dealers, and the job they do is all about kind of like wave control and, getting their freezes off. They will definitely benefit, obviously, but it's not like they really take damage, and it's not like you really benefit as much. So although these champions are very good, I think these benefit a lot less on the kind of like the empowerment versus some of the other stuff that I'm talking about. Champions like Ruella, again, high build requirements, more damage out of their kit. It's going to be useful in dungeon running. There's actually one champion I think might pop out in a bunch of content, which is this fella, Phoenix. He hits like an absolute freight train, but he's quite squishy. He's one of these champions that's quite hard to keep alive. Ice Golem hard. If you bring him to take out the side adds, his A1 block revives, does a ton of damage. We also might see him in live arena because of this A1. With all of those extra stats, is he suddenly going to be able to come in and crush, one-shot enemy tanks and that type of thing? I guess another champion in the same vein for arena, if we're going to pop to arena for a bit, potentially is Gala. Gala has got some ignore defense mechanics. Her biggest problem right now is that she doesn't really hit hard enough to deal with, some of the high-level champions that you play against in arena, but she's Void. I've seen her used on, I think Shinny used her quite a lot on his content at one stage where he was using her in live arena because she gets extra turn mechanics as well. And she was hitting for decent damage. If suddenly she's got tons more stats, especially if you've got a blessing on her, then she might find a way into quite a bit of live arena. A couple of other arena champions then that we could throw in the mix. Where is this guy? Shadowkin. So what about someone like Gembo? Hard hitter. Is a +4 Gembo going to outdo, you know, a regular level legendary champion, especially if he's got a blessing and, you know, he's got extra turn mechanics. He's got the ability to nuke people down, you know, ripping off buffs at the same time. I think Gembo might get a little bit of a call. I don't know if he's going to be like top level play, but definitely could be in the mix. And, you know, someone like a Skull Crown as well. A +4 Skull Crown versus a +0 Leo. Don't know. You know, has she got a chance to start to get in the mix with, you know, some of the old cool epics that used to kind of rule arena back in the day? I guess the last one in the mix there for me for arena would be potentially someone like a Magnar. Does he start coming back into play with 40% more HP as his base? It's a lot. It's a lot of extra stats. And suddenly he becomes, you know, one of the strong HP-based nukers again. So interesting to see if someone like that can get themselves back on the table. It hadn't really crossed my mind until I just thought about it this second, but, you know, what about champions that can help with stuff like Bommel? So, you know, we've got, where is she? Yeah, is Ishbal. A couple of Ishbals versus Bommel can actually take it down. That becomes way easier if you've got much higher base attack or attack in general, you know, with empowerment, because the thing with bombs is they scale purely from attack. So, you know, getting all of those extra base stats could be the difference between people being able to build her to take Bommel down or not. And if we're focused on Doom Tower here, well, there's a couple of champions that really are close to being able to solo stuff like Bommel. So, yeah, Lady Annabelle's one. So he's got the capability of soloing Bommel, but struggles against like hard 90. Buren Giri is another one. Same sort of vibe. You know, up at hard 90 becomes much more difficult, but possible. And, you know, with some of the blessing changes and with empowerment, pretty much like high up there is a good chance. You've got champions like Seer getting the extra crit rate, crit damage, extra bit of speed to come back round again. You know, for general wave-based content, it will help her. Interestingly, Saf was calling out with someone like Seer. He likes Seer to die against Ice Golem. So all of those extra base stats to keep her alive might be a bit of a problem in his type of build. So that's another way of looking at things, which I think was a good call out. But yeah, Seer getting extra crit rate, crit damage, bit of extra speed is all going to be helpful towards her builds for like general stuff and Doom Tower builds. Another champion that I use still in Doom Tower, mainly for Dark Fae, is Allure. And the Allure build is quite tough to do as well, especially if you're going for like high level hard content. So Allure might be able to benefit because she actually needs a lot of stats. Crit rate, accuracy, lots of speed, survivability, and then sometimes like my Allure build is built to do damage as well. So she almost needs all of the stats on the board. So anything that can help her out there will be really useful, I think. And then the last one I've kind of called out as a general stroke Doom Towery is the Fat Man. You know, he's, again, needs a lot of stats. I don't think he benefits in the same way as some of these other champions that I've spoken about, but the extra speed, the extra accuracy, the extra stats to keep him alive, I think could be pretty good as a more of a generalist. Let's talk about Sintranos quickly then. So Sintranos is tough content, and there's probably like a whole list, honestly, of epics that would be good for Sintranos. You know, you've got like your Rock Breakers, you've got, I don't know, literally tons of epics that you could use, but a few which really stand out to me are Morag. Morag, I often find is my damage dealer in some of these epic teams if she's available to be used. She does a lot of damage and she's got good survivability as well. So just being able to build her out stronger and more effective is going to be good. Who else did I put in for Sintranos here? Oh yeah, this is a good one. Again, someone that can solo stuff, it generally, like in the game, in dungeons and that, also is extremely strong in Sintranos. So, and a Kempton, potentially strong in other areas as well, honestly, but Kempton with just more stats, is it going to make it easier to do his builds, keep him alive for longer, especially if he's trying to solo his way through things. Who else did I have in there? Vogoth as a kind of like more of a generalist. The more stats he's got, the easier it is to keep you alive. So, you know, he's kind of like tankiness. He might also find some space back in the arena again as well, as just like a bit of a powerhouse. anyone who is a solo type of champion, so champions like Bushy, you know, anyone that's got this type of revive myself mechanic and can come in and do a job against, I don't know, in Sintranos, places like Bommel, places like the Sand Devil. There's a whole bunch of areas where Bushies or Basilisks or anyone with this type of torture helms, you know, anyone with this unkillable thing, it just makes them easier to build, I think. You know, more speed, more stats. But I guess their thing is they do have to die, so maybe they're not quite as high on the list as kind of like EPICS. Let's talk about Hydra. I think Hydra's probably the area where you get the most benefit. For the average player, I think you get the most benefit in Hydra. There's a couple which are going to be like potentially massive picks. So Royal Guard. We all know how good he is anyway. You know, he's got the enemy max HP on a 4-turn. I think you're more likely to be able to build someone like a Royal Guard in Relentless gear or Reflex gear or, you know, some form of gear to try and get back to this more often. He's very squishy as a champion, so you've got a better chance of being able to keep him alive as well. I do think that he's going to be, he needs accuracy for his decreased speed, which is actually a massive debuff in Hydra. So I think Royal Guard could be popping up in some big teams. And I also think Husk will do the same. Husk was already a big pick anyway, but just ease of build, you know, more accuracy towards things like the provokes. I think we'll start seeing him in some, you know, like nightmare teams again, potentially. So 2 big ones there. Shamal is obviously good anyway, but easier to build, easier to keep alive. And, you know, he's quite stat hungry as well. I find my Shamal quite difficult to keep alive, actually, in my Hydra team. So going to be just generally a good champion. Udo's another one, just generally a good champion who's used in a ton of Hydra teams. I'm not saying that Udo's like the best contender for the stat boost, but, you know, the survivability and accuracy boost, all that type of stuff is just going to help. And then someone like a Skrank, good Hydra champion, lots of damage out of this guy. You know, the extra accuracy, the extra damage that you get from him is going to be pretty useful, I think, in Hydra. The other one, which I'm sure Saf is going to be all over, is his girl Whisper. Whisper's got potential to gain more than almost any other champion, I think, from a PvE point of view. I think she's going to be popping up in Hydra teams. I think she's going to be more viable in stuff like Phantom's Grove. Yeah, I just can see that she might actually start to get a real amount of playtime with her. Yeah, she's just a high damage dealer. She's a bit like Little Miss Annie, but slightly weaker version. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, like a +4 Whisper with a high blessing versus an Annie without the pluses. Who wins out over that? It's going to be quite an interesting matchup. So yeah, I think that covers most of the things. So the other area which just people will need to consider, but as I say, I think it's less important, would be clan boss. So, you know, if you've got somebody like a Demitha, the only way I think you get any benefit is if you just get the extra speed, because her builds are very speed hungry. So, but I do think if you're +4 in a Demitha, chances are you can already do clan boss quite easily anyway. So less relevant. Same with Maneater, less relevant, but they're on the list. Someone who might be quite interesting is champions like, what is she, Barbarian? Champions like Alika. So if you've got a 6-star blessing on Alika and you start +4 in, she does a ton of damage anyway. You know, maybe she pops into some decent one key teams for clan boss as a damage dealer. And then someone like a Seeker, again, just because he's quite stat hungry. But really, if you're +4 in a Seeker for clan boss, you're probably already in a good spot for clan boss. So that's kind of like the direction that I'm taking this. I think there's an element of get ready as much as you can. And that just means stop feeding epics if you were. I definitely was. Like, there's so many epics that I've fed over the last year. It's insane. So now I need to get into that mindset of keep hold of the good ones that we think are going to do some work, especially in higher end content. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I missed any that you're definitely keen to see +forward and why. And I will see you in the next one.